Welcome, listeners, to Spectral Margins, where the lines between reality and nightmare blur, and the shadows have more to say than we care to admit. I'm your host, Lucius Voss, the Lurking Specter. Tonight, we have a trifecta of terror for you, delving into 3 stories that question the boundaries of life, death, and the uncanny spaces in between. They'll make you reconsider what's real and whether you'd prefer to look away. First, we follow a driver through a routine construction zone, only to find that it's anything but ordinary. Cones and workers bend and twist the familiar into something horrifyingly new. Then we'll step beyond the veil of death itself. What happens when your journey doesn't end after your final breath? What if the tunnels of the afterlife are as uncertain as the lives we leave behind? And finally, we head on back to a dark and sinister road, where the behavior matches the setting all too well. So sit back and keep the lights low. After all, some things are clearer in the dark. First, Under Construction, written by Micah Edwards, brought to us by our friends at Velix Publishing, and performed by Kris Konkol.
I thought it was just like any other construction zone. It looked the same cones, same signs, same trucks. And honestly, if people would learn how to drive, I probably never would have noticed any difference. But people get stupid in the face of anything different. And so instead of cruising through at the recommended 45 miles per hour, we were crawling along at about 15 miles per hour, while some idiot up ahead talked himself through his fear of orange cones. So I was drifting slowly, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel and cursing whoever gave that moron his license, when my eye fell on one of the construction workers. I don't even know what caught my eye. He wasn't moving, wasn't doing anything in particular, but something about him was wrong. It was nothing I could exactly put my finger on, but you know that feeling you get when you look at a computer-generated image of a person that's good, but not good enough? It was just like that, sent a physical shiver down my spine. I focused on him, trying to figure out what the problem was, what had drawn my attention, and I realized pretty quickly it was everything. He was wrong, put together wrong, nothing major, nothing huge, nothing I would have seen if we weren't driving so slowly. But his arms and legs weren't quite the right proportion to his body. His neck was too long, his feet were too short, his clothes hung wrong like they were connected to his skin. He moved oddly, his motions too planned and precise. And although his yellow helmet shadowed his face, I had the impression that his features were the worst of all. I couldn't make out any more than a glimpse above his nose and cheekbones, but the eyes that glittered there looked too big, too wide, and his mouth was clenched as if he was straining to contain something within. A horn behind me snapped my attention back to the road. I realized that the traffic ahead had cleared, and now I was the idiot holding everything up. I stepped on the accelerator and left the bizarre worker behind. That should have been the end of it. I should have gone on my way and forgotten all about it. But that night, at home, I found myself thinking about the construction worker again. He disturbed me on a bone-deep level. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it wasn't just him. In my memory, the whole site started to take on odd imperfections. The cones too tall, the trucks too angled, the signs moving wrong in the wind of passing cars. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. I'd seen a weird guy, and now my imagination was blowing it out of proportion. And had he really been that weird? So he moved oddly. Maybe he'd been in a construction accident. Maybe he just had a bum leg. It was no big deal. No matter how much I told myself that, though, I couldn't put the idea aside. My mind kept circling back to the same thought. That construction zone was wrong. Dangerously wrong. I went to bed, resolving to forget about it. But at 1 o'clock in the morning, after I'd startled myself awake from a dream where a man in an orange safety vest unfolded into a grasping flower of bloody teeth, I admitted defeat. I got up, got dressed, and drove back to the construction zone. I parked on the shoulder, a few dozen yards before the cones started. The scene was well lit by the full moon as I walked up, so I didn't bother to turn on my phone's flashlight. I approached the first sign, a foldable plastic diamond reading, "Roadwork ahead." It was bigger than I expected, almost as tall as I was. I'd never actually been this close to one before, though, so I didn't know if that was wrong. It looked fine, the letters evenly printed and the edges machine cut. When I rubbed the sign between my fingers, though, it didn't feel anything like I'd expected. It looked like a rubbery plastic, like the stuff they make outdoor tablecloths out of, but it felt leathery, almost organic. It was firm and resisted my attempts to tear it or poke a hole in it. Still, it seemed basically normal, and I didn't know how construction signs were supposed to feel. I walked on, moving towards a parked truck. I glanced around, clear on the fact that if anyone came by right now, I'd look like I was planning on stealing the equipment, but the road was empty. I reached the truck and rapped on it with my knuckles. It made a metal sound, just like you'd expect. I looked inside through the driver's window, and everything appeared normal. I was starting to feel silly, but also a bit relieved. I began to mock myself for getting worked up enough to drive out to a construction site in the middle of the night to investigate a fantasy. And then, passing by one of the large orange and white plastic barrels that separated the construction site from the road, I swung out with my foot to kick it. Instead of the hollow plastic thump I'd expect, though, I was met with a solid thud. It felt like kicking a telephone pole. There was very little give. My foot took the brunt of the impact, not the presumably hollow barrel. Confused, I put both hands on the barrel and pushed. It shifted, tipping slightly, and something glistened beneath it. I pushed harder and the barrel toppled to its side, crashing to the ground like a felled tree, and revealed the opening at the base. The barrel was filled with a thick, mucousy web, somewhere between a liquid and a gel. I could just barely see darker shapes inside the viscous substance, and I turned on my phone's light to get a better view. The fluid itself was an unhealthy phlegm yellow and barely translucent. The shape it protected filled almost the entire barrel, and even with my light, I could make out few details. What I could see were mainly indistinct shapes in neon yellow and orange. It was as if someone had stuffed a highway worker's safety gear into the barrel and then filled the whole thing up with homemade glue before setting it down. I wanted to see more of what was in that barrel, but I wasn't about to risk getting any of that disgusting mass on my hands. I looked around for a stick and spotted one lying not far away. I walked over to pick it up, but as I bent down, I saw another barrel rustle. It was a slight movement, and in the moonlight, I thought I might have imagined it. I stayed frozen in place for almost a full minute, waiting for it to happen again, but the barrel remained still. Finally, I approached the barrel and gave it a gentle shove, leaping back as I did so. Like the first one, this barrel barely moved when I pushed it. After a moment of nothing happening, I gave it a firmer two-handed shove, knocking it over. This one too was filled with the gluey mess, but whatever was inside of it was much darker and seemed larger. And as the barrel hit the ground, it very clearly moved, shifting inside and straining to push free. I leapt back when I saw that, and I think I shouted aloud. I should have turned and run then, but as the barrel rocked slightly on the ground, I found myself watching with a horrified compulsion. The rocking intensified, and after a moment, a finger reached through the whitish goo. It looked human, but as it tore free, more fingers followed, attached to a hand that was too long and jointed wrong. The hand extended far enough for me to see a rubbery white sleeve fused at its wrist before withdrawing. A foot came next, shoving through the hole the hand had made. It looked like a work boot at first, but it was far too flexible and the toes were articulated. There was a spike of some sort at the heel too, which it used to tear the hole wider. The foot pressed through, dragging behind it a leg, with the knee bent backwards, looking broken. The hand returned then, followed by another, and the creature gripped the sides of the barrels as it pulled itself free with a wet sucking sound. Its other leg eased free and it slowly stood, its backward knees less obvious as it locked them into place. It had the general form and clothes of a construction worker, right down to the yellow hard hat, but as it stood there, silhouetted by the moon and glistening with goo, it could barely have looked less human. Its yellow vest fluttered, controlled by the strange muscles as it dried itself in the still night air. Something about this action finally broke my reverie, and I resisted an impulse to just sprint for my car. Instead, I took a quiet step backwards, then another, hoping to avoid its notice. My back bumped against the truck, and the creature turned and stared me full in the face. Our eyes met, and its mouth unfurled in a scream. I turned to run and found that we were far from alone. A loose ring of ersatz construction workers surrounded me, their eyes shining, their neon colors bright under the full moon. They joined in the scream, the noise some impossible combination of radio static and a bat's shriek. Their heads were thrown back in a nightmare of mandibles and flexible teeth, and in that instant, I ran. I sprinted between them, smacking one aside with a strength born of fear. I heard it hiss as I struck it, and I felt a heavy thump on my back as I received a blow in return. But though I stumbled, I kept my footing and continued my mad dash for the car. As I yanked the door open and leapt inside, I saw them racing towards me. I started the car and mashed the accelerator, knocking two of them to the ground with my bumper. They rolled clear and I sped off, driving through that construction zone like demons were after me. The construction zone was gone the next day. I don't know what I would have done if it had still been there, and maybe it's fine, and maybe it's over now. Lately, though, I feel like I've been seeing a lot of construction. Often it's in places where there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with the road, and the workers just seem to be standing around as if they're waiting for something. I haven't gotten a good glimpse of any of them yet, but I'm afraid that if I did, I'd see hands that were too long, knees that bent the wrong way, heavy browed eyes glittering beneath their helmets. And frankly, I'm not inclined to slow down to look. I have a feeling that's exactly what they want.
That was Under Construction, written by Micah Edwards and brought to life by Kris Konkol. You can find this and many more tales by checking out Micah's book, Fright Bites, which you can find available through our friends at Velix Publishing. Visit www.velixbooks.com to find more. Now, we move into a realm few dare to imagine. Life after death is the great unknown, but what if the unknown is as confusing as the life you left? I present The Day I Died and the Day I Lived by author Corpse Child and performed by me, Lucius Voss. It was a Tuesday, the day I died. At least, I think it was. Hard to remember, going through so many lanes of traffic to get where I'm at now. The first lane took me to an intersection, the one where all the screamers pass through. They howled at me before dissipating into the void, off to who the hell knew where. I continued through the intersection, taking a right into the next lane, leading to where I thought would have been my drop-off. That's where I thought I was supposed to go. You know, the light at the far end of the dark tunnel? That's what they kept telling us, at least. When I passed to the other side of there, I couldn't tell where I was anymore. It wasn't heaven, that was for damn sure. Not any version of it I ever heard about anyways. If the hordes of wispy, shrieking apparitions swirling around a tubular-shaped void are angels, then nobody that reads this has any right to make fun of people who renounce Christianity. Was it hell then? Probably not. Again, no flames, just screams. Then again, those were everywhere. So what made this any different? I ferried myself to the end of this tunnel and found myself at another junction. 3 tunnels laid before me, presenting me with the options of a blinding tunnel, one chocked full of screamers, and an empty one directly ahead of me. I wanted to take the blinding light. I was ferried through the screaming tunnel. Whoever was guiding me along this literal God-forsaken journey had a sense of humor, apparently. Of all the tunnels containing screamers that I'd ever remember anyways, this one had to have been the longest. Along the way, as any like me would, I picked up on all manner of obscenities being spewed left, right, and everywhere in between. Through many voices, through many dialects, I heard all sorts of weird things, ranging from, "We're all one in him in the end," to, "The butler slept with my wife. I had to do it." And even one or two children or childlike voices crying for their mothers, fathers, or whomever the hell was supposed to be their guardian. I learned very quickly to drown most of it out, as much as possible anyways. I'd go insane if I didn't, and the fact that I haven't just goes to show how far gone my mind, body, and spirit really are, and were by even this point in time. That being said, hearing all of this was an annoyance. An eternity or two later, and I finally reached the end of this tunnel, spilling out into a sort of clearing. By this, I mean there was no open tunnels anywhere, only the wide expanse of eternal Vanta black as far as ethereal eyes could see. The screamers spilled out shortly behind me. For a moment, their shrieks filled the void around, before dying off completely. I was alone. For the first time then, perhaps since I'd first arrived in these tunnels, I had to ask myself several questions. The first to come to mind, of course, was where? Then how? And following this was the why. At the very bottom of the list was the question of who I was. The answer to that one came in an instant. My name was Frederick. Frederick something. I looked at myself, my wispy, shapeless, vaporous mass, only half an identity, and only half a conscious mind. How sad is that? The answer to the others came in some fragmented waves. I couldn't be sure, but I was pretty sure I was dead, and so that, at least somewhat, answered the how and why. The where was, and to a degree is still, the one I couldn't answer. As I said before, it wasn't heaven, and I didn't think it was hell. A part of me remembers hearing stories of purgatory, a place you go between the veils separating heaven and hell, where you go to await judgment or whatever. Like a lobby, basically, a place to wait. Except, why then were there so many different tunnels and highways? Do all of them lead to places like this? If not, where do they lead? I sat there, defying gravity and the formless void for another eternity before I finally noticed two things in quick succession. The first was that I couldn't remember my name anymore, except that it had something to do with Fred, or at least I think it does. Maybe. The second thing was that the void was shaking all around me. Spots of glowing, burning golden light breached through the darkness, exuding beams of burning energy directly at me. Several missed. One came in contact with me, and in that moment, regardless if I were dead or alive, that was the worst, most agonizing pain I'll ever feel. Bar none. It was the pain of 1,000 hot pokers being driven into my eyeballs, all while shards of glass were getting driven into every orifice possible. Had I a mouth, I would have screamed so loud and hard enough to shake this void myself. As it were, I was glad I didn't have eyes any longer. That at least spared me the witness of the other lights continuing to bombard me, all while being directed by a voice from a being clearly very large, very powerful, and very upset with me.
Your soul is tainted,
and it must be cleansed, for you are not yet lost." The words reverberated through my body as though he bellowed them through a mold of jelly. It was hard enough to comprehend them as words, so actually knowing what the hell he was talking about was next to impossible. I had neither inclination nor time to humor the question before more of the light was torturing me. This time, it was as if the same aforementioned pokers were being set ablaze, heating them to their hottest degree possible, while raging, screaming hot embers were being stuffed into the gaping gashes created by the aforementioned shards of glass. What's worse was that this took longer than even the trek through the internal void, and 10 times as torturous. I'm still not sure when it all ended. To a degree, I'm not sure the suffering ever did, even now. I suppose then I'll say, when I regained consciousness, I was in the middle of a street somewhere. 2 or 3 cars zipped past me, then a guy on a bike, followed with a few soccer moms on a jog. It all looked familiar in a basic sense, yet at the same time, I recognized none of it at all. This might be the hardest thing to explain about all of this. A part of me feels like I should recognize this place, and yet I don't. Like right now, I'm in a bookstore. A small part of me remembers being in a place just like this before. Just like the street, I was there before. I was there, but I don't know them anymore. I've tried so many times now to remember my goddamn name that I've given up and began calling myself Steve. I know that's not my name, only picking it up from a sign I read somewhere along that road. But at this point, how do I know it wasn't? I'm writing all of this to say, well, I really don't know why. Maybe it's supposed to try to help me piece together what happened to me before now. Maybe it's supposed to commemorate a past life or whatever the hell that means. I don't know. I'm not sure I ever will know. All I'll say is this. I was in a bookstore once, then on a street, and I think this all took place on a Tuesday, just like today. Come to think of it, I don't think I've seen the sun go down at all today. It should be Wednesday, but it's still Tuesday. I died on a Tuesday, and I'm alive on a Tuesday. That was The Day I Died and the Day I Lived, written by Corpse Child, and brought to you by me, Lucius Voss. You can check out more of Corpse Child's work on Facebook, Reddit, and pretty much anywhere where horror reigns and the shadows are welcomed. In fact, he has a new book coming out tomorrow called Swine Mountain, Book 2 of the Swine series, on Amazon. And in our final tale, we dive into a tale where one choice on a dark road spirals into a nightmare. With a bruised heart and body, a woman named Alma discovers that life's worst turns can be more than metaphorical. Written by C.W. Stevenson and brought to life by N.M. Brown and myself, this is Wave of Death. The engine of the Honda Civic buzzed to life as Alma pushed her foot harder on the pedal. It was night, she was late, and she was none too happy with herself or the situation at hand. The power of speed made her feel a little more in control of the situation. An illusion. She had no control, and not so deep down, she knew it. Alma pressed harder on the pedal anyway. The client, Mr. Jensen, had already berated her for being late once before. Her excuse the first time was insomnia. Mr. Jensen asked her in a rather accusatory tone, "How many times are you going to use that before you start losing clients?" A valid question she didn't have a good answer for, but damned if she wasn't doing her best. Alma considered herself a dog sitter, a dog walker, and a groomer when she could convince owners to let her near their beloved pets with a pair of dog clippers. Zeus was waiting for her, a behemoth bull mastiff who adored her and she him. To lose Mr. Jensen as a client would be a devastating blow, not just to her heart, but to her wallet as well.
Do better,
she said to herself in the rearview mirror. A middle-aged woman with pear green eyes and black hair speckled with gray stared back at her, glancing back to the road, eyes wide with fear. Alma slammed on her brakes, stopping herself from nearly smashing into the car in front of her.
Jesus,
she exclaimed, narrowing her eyes at the vehicle. She observed its make and model, a green Ford Explorer. The illuminating taillights let her see an old woman glaring back at her through the driver's side mirror. The Ford began to move again, Alma following close behind.
Move,
she muttered. There was plenty of room on the side of the road, but the Ford kept going, slowly.
Move!
Alma screamed, slapping the middle of the steering wheel. The horn emitted a pathetic beep. In front of her, brake lights flared. Her eyes squinted at the quick succession of flashes as the old woman continued to tap her brakes.
Old bitch.
Checking the lane first for oncoming traffic, Alma swerved over. Then she noticed the curve up ahead. Pressing down hard on the pedal, she knew she could make it. That is, until a blue sports car came zipping around the curve, all but flying. Closing her eyes, Alma braced for impact. She only wished she had time for a final thought, one more breath before the end. But upon opening her eyes, Alma saw the car in the rearview mirror. Pulling alongside the Ford, Alma flipped the old woman the bird, screaming.
Thanks for almost getting me killed.
Then she cut in front of the old woman and stepped on the gas. Calling her sister Marie, she explained what happened through the tears, a mixture of anger, shame, and regret washing over her.
My fault,
she continued.
All my fault. It's okay,
said Marie.
It's all okay now. Now get off the damn phone while you're driving and pay attention to the road.
Arriving at Mr. Jensen's house, she again apologized profusely before Mr. Jensen pleaded with her to do better next time and that he'd have to leave. Soon, it was just Alma and Zeus on the couch and a pizza. Allowing Zeus a forbidden piece of crust, he swallowed it whole. Beginning to feel a bit better, she rubbed a new bruise that formed on the crook of her right arm. The next morning, back at her apartment, Alma went through her regular routine. Wake up, shower, dress, make some eggs before going to work. While making her breakfast, she was amazed at how she'd neglected to notice the worsening state of her arm while in the shower. Black, blue, and veiny, the bruise was certainly a nasty one. Furthermore, it appeared far larger, covering her elbow and nearly half her forearm. Flexing and bending her arm several times, everything seemed to be functioning properly. So she went about her business, scoffed down an omelet, then washed it down with a tall glass of orange juice. Grabbing her backpack of dog treats, leashes, and toys, she headed out the door and drove to the first house. Dachshunds were often hit or miss when it came to temperament. Either they were the sweetest, lovable animals on the face of the earth, or they were miniature hellhounds sent from the devil himself to torment dog walkers, their owners, or anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. Luckily, the Patel's pack of dachshunds were mostly good-natured, unless it came to dog treats. In that case, the eldest dachshund, a dapple with a beautiful coat of black, white, brown, and gray, named Dixie, would snap and growl at the others, insisting all snacks belonged to her and her alone. Dixie was clearly the queen of the household. Alma learned quickly to separate the four sisters before distributing any snacks. On their walk, Alma began to limp after half a mile. Her ankle hurt so much that before turning around to head back to the Patel's house, she had to rest on a street bench. She hadn't tripped, or at least couldn't recall doing so. As she made her way back, she found that she could scarcely walk at all. Dixie and the other dachshunds yipped excitedly, despite having been cheated of half of their walk. They pulled and tugged as they urged Alma to move quicker, sometimes choking on their collars in the process. But Alma was unable to keep up with their pace. At many points, she was afraid she'd let go of the leashes, fall onto the sidewalk, and watch helplessly as the poor animals ran into traffic. To her credit, she bit her bottom lip, focusing on the night's dinner plans with Jonathan, and made it back with little more than a sweaty brow and the limp.
"Take the money," Mr. Patel insisted. "You did not have that limp before. You're too humble, Alma."
Still unable to remember exactly how such an injury had occurred, Alma nodded her head.
Thank you, really. I'll be back tomorrow, though, I promise.
"Take your time, my dear. See a podiatrist. They'll sort you out. The girls are going nowhere."
Panicked about the possible loss of income, Alma inquired.
How will they get walked?
Mr. Patel waved a hand. "Oh, I can do that for now. Don't you worry yourself, my dear. Just focus on recovering."
The rest of the afternoon consisted of making an appointment with a podiatrist, calling her clients scheduled through the next few days to let them know she would be out sick, and running by a gas station to get some Tylenol, some Gatorade, and the biggest bag of potato chips she could find. Elevating her foot on the couch, she placed an ice pack on her ankle, devoured her chips, and fell into a deep slumber. Alma's alarm woke her. Her body wasn't just sore, but in great pain. Something was terribly wrong. But she thought of Jonathan. Her mind made up. She popped twice the recommended amount of Tylenol to her mouth and made her way to the shower. Removing her clothes, she stepped into the shower and held up her arm to inspect the bruise. Her eyes went wide at the mangled skin she was staring at, unconvinced for a moment it was her own. Glancing down, cuts and bruises plagued her body. Cuts and bruises plagued her body, or what was left of it. Glass stuck out of her like so many knives. She nearly fainted then. Grabbing onto the door just in time, she smelt something chemical, something she couldn't place. Alma screamed as blood began to pour from the shower head. She saw two flashing lights as the world began to darken around her. Then her body jolted. "Stay with us." Alma peered through blurry vision. Somehow it turned night. Beside her, vapor steamed up from the front of her Honda. The window shattered. Much of the vehicle was unrecognizable. To her left, a blue sports car was burning. Someone inside was screaming. Those around the car backed up as the flames grew and grew, and the person's screams drowned out by the roar of the flames. "She's losing too much blood, man. You've done all you can."
Am I dying?
Alma asked, finally finding a young man in a paramedic's uniform looking down on her. He had kind eyes, but they looked sad. Delirious, yet conscious enough to grasp the situation, Alma began to raise her arm to see the bruise. To her horror, she found a nub with a tourniquet attached at the elbow. Blood was still leaking out. The paramedic gently pushed her shoulder down. As the world turned to black, she heard Marie reverberating through the lips of the paramedic.
It's okay. It's all okay now.
That was Wave of Death by C.W. Stevenson, a visceral journey that reminds us of the fragility of control and the haunting echoes of our choices. A native of San Antonio, Texas, C.W. Clint Stevenson resides there with his wife, son, and their retinue of furry companions. In his spare time, he reads vigorously, spends time with his family, and collects too many books to read in one lifetime. Clint's work can be found in Alien Dimensions, Illustrated Worlds magazine, and our amazing friends over at CreepyPod. The stories featured tonight remind us that the boundaries we think of as certain between life and death, the familiar and the uncanny, may not be as dependable as we believe. The spectral margins surround us, stretching further than we'd like to admit. Until next Tuesday, I'm Lucius Voss, urging you to watch the road carefully and sleep lightly.